Hello everyone, it's Becky here from Ivy's Corner, and I'm here today to do a little tile that I'm going to put together with some of the tangles that I've been posting on my YouTube channel recently. So if you haven't seen them, then just have a little look at what my previous videos that I've posted. The tangles I'm going to be using today are these three: Foundabout, Cubine and Betweed. I will try and pop some little links to my videos of these three tangles where I go through them individually. But as always, I'm going to just start my little tangling session here with a moment for gratitude and appreciation. So just taking a moment to have a deep breath and relax the body, place the feet on the floor and just get comfortable in the way we're sat. And just hold something in our minds that we're thankful for today. So whether that's your friends and family, or where you live, or the weather today, or perhaps just the time we've got to sit and be creative. It's always good to hold something in our minds that we're thankful for today. So on my tile, this isn't a Zentangle tile. This is just a self-cut piece of Fabriano Teplé paper. I've got my tile, my Micron PN, my Zentangle pencil and tortillon here. And to begin with, I'm going to just draw my dots in a border. Like so. And then just link these dots together to form my border. Don't have to be straight. There we go. I'm going to do a very simple string, just joining two of the corners together diagonally, just to give me a bit of a guideline for where I'm going to be drawing. And so I'm going to pick up my pen, and the first pattern that I'm going to tangle on my tile is Foundabout. If you're not familiar with that, I will put a little card hopefully on this video, so you should be able to click it, and that will take you to a video that I've done about drawing that particular tangle. But the first stroke for this particular pattern is to begin, I'm going to begin down in the corner of my tile and just draw kind of a fairly wide arc like this. And then I'm going to aura that. So I have this sort of skinny crescent shape. I'm going to turn my tile and just going to continue to repeat that shape, coming out of the last one that I drew. So this one here is growing out of the centre of the first one, turning my tile, and I'm going to be keeping them fairly large because I don't want them to be too small. It's kind of tricky. I find when I first started tangling, I did find that it was hard to keep my tangling big and bold. I was sort of drawing quite small and teeny tiny, but the more you do, the easier it is to get a little bit more bold with what you're tangling. My last one here is just going to be a little bit on the smaller side, and maybe I'll just pop a teeny tiny one at the top there. So once we've got our kind of base line for our Foundabout tangle, I'm going to do the next stroke of this tangle, which is to draw sort of a more of a seed pod shape on here. So I'm going to start up here. Now you can make this any shape you like, but I'm going to kind of go with the traditional Foundabout shape, which is to come in a little and then open it out to the bottom. I'm being a bit squashed there because of where it is on the tile, but I'll show you again here. Starting thinner at the top and then out and curving round to the bottom. Starting thin at the top, coming out and round to the bottom. So it's sort of like a wide bottomed S shape almost. And I'm keeping these spaces fairly large because I'm going to put another tangle in here in a second. One little one at the end, like so. So that's the basis of our Foundabout, but I'm going to add one more line in. So the concept of drawing behind, you might be familiar with in the Zentangle method, which is where we basically draw up to something we've already placed on the tile, lift our pen and then continue to draw behind. So I'm going to begin here, draw my line, which is going to come down to the bottom of this shape here. But as I've reached here, I'm going to lift my pen pretend it's drawing behind, and then bring it down where I think it would go. So I'm sort of just imagining where that line would be placed. Beginning here, coming to here, lifting the pen, and then continuing that line behind. And then just turning my tile, taking it nice and slowly, and completing these sort of pod shapes so they all tuck inside one another. Just having a little look beforehand of where my line might go. You can sort of trace it in the air first. You're going to start at one point and finish at the other. And just nice and slowly joining those lines together, joining those points together with this line. There we go. So that is Foundabout. It's travelling diagonally across my tile to fill the space. Before I do anything else, I am actually going to just aura this. So I'm going to just add a fairly small aura. I'm going to turn my tile so that I can see more easily where the line I'm drawing around is. Now, if you're not familiar with the Zentangle method and the sort of terminology that's used, the word aura is just relating to drawing around something. So adding a line that surrounds something that you've already drawn. And it's a really nice way of having kind of a bit of a meditative stroke, I suppose, to your tile, because we're not having to think too hard about where that line's going to go. If our aura is going to remain the same distance from our original shape, we don't have to think about where it's going to go. We're just following what we've already drawn. So it's quite nice and relaxing. And also it's going to separate these shapes that I've drawn already from what's going to come next. So tangles that I'm going to draw, which will fall behind this original shape. If at any point you need to pause this video to catch up or take things a little slower than I'm doing, then please feel free to do so. That's absolutely fine. This is going off of the tile slightly there. That's fine. Okay, so there we have Foundabout with a little aura. Now I'm going to add in our next tangle to this tile, but what I'm going to do is actually place it within these spaces that we've got here, the Foundabout spaces. And the tangle I'm going to place in there is going to be Betweed, which looks a bit like this. I'll see if I can put a card up here for that, a link to that video. But I'm going to place, now there's a few different ways you can place Betweed in these shapes. Now these shapes aren't necessarily most obvious of how you would go about placing your Betweed in there. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. And obviously if you want to do something different or you end up doing something different by accident, that's completely fine. There's no right or wrong answer. This is just what I'm going to do on this occasion. So to do it, I'm going to turn my tile this way. And I am going to come from these points of my Foundabout seed pod here. And I'm going to bring a sort of a tethered aura. So I'm going to aura this line here, but begin here, aura this line, but come slightly further away from it. So I'm going to start here and then sort of bring it round, sweeping to that side here. Turn my tile and then do the same thing here. Start at this point, come down and then bump into that line. And I'm just going to repeat that process again and again. Taking my time. And what it's going to do is create this interesting plaited effect. An interesting plaited effect that's kind of going to fill that space that we had. Stopping there. I'm going to just repeat that process on these other lower sections of my Foundabout. So starting from here this time and coming round. And you can see how my aura began smaller and then got a little bit wider. I'm not keeping them I'm keeping my auras fairly evenly spaced. I don't want them to be too small because it will just be very, very tiny in details and maybe a little bit harder to see. On to my next one. Just curving these lines round. And it's the repetitive nature of this tangle which I think is really, really nice. You don't have to think too hard about where the lines are going to go. But it kind of provides a nice texture. Just gently moving the pen from one space to another. Turning the tile as I go to keep my hand nice and relaxed. Kind of almost looks a bit feathery, I think. Kind of like gives the illusion of feathers, I think, this particular tangle, perhaps just in this particular setting, but it does look really nice, I think. Obviously there's lots of different tangles you could place in this Foundabout shape, so if you drew the Foundabout and didn't really like the look of this, you can choose a different one. There's no rules. It's always interesting to see how everyone has different approaches, I think. Because this one's really tiny, I don't want to make it too small, so I'm just only going to do a few little betweed in here. There we go. So there is my Foundabout with Betweed. I think what I'd like to do, I will obviously come on to shading this later, but I think what I'm going to do is just add a slightly inked in aura in here, because what I wanted was to kind of just give it a little bit more definition and boldness. So just adding a thin aura, a fine aura, and then inking that in. I'm just adding some weight to this line that's in between. We'll just give it a little bit more definition. There's something about adding a bit of ink, which is always nice to do, I think, with a tile. Give it a bit more weight. And actually, sometimes when you're thinking about your next step, if you want to just go in and adjust some lines or add a little bit of ink or line weight, it's quite a nice thing to do while you're considering your next steps with a tile. Now, I obviously wanted to include 3 different tangles that I've worked on my YouTube channel. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Cubine, and I'm going to do it, I'm going to try it and see how it looks by doing it this way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just initially ink in this line here. So inking in my borderline, like so. And I think rather than having kind of regular square Cubine like this, what I'm going to do is experiment with adding it on a sort of a diagonal. So we're going to see, I don't know how this is going to work, I haven't planned it, so we'll see how it looks. I'm going to draw this space with a line in half, and then I'm going to halve that again, and then halve that line, that triangle. Again, just thinking about where that line would go behind what I've drawn so far. And I'm going to curve this round. So these are my squares. They're not particularly square, but obviously these ones then will be more square. Getting a little bit larger as we go. If you wanted to do regular square cubine, then absolutely go for it. This is going to be slightly more challenging. So there's my grid that's kind of growing out of a single point. I'm going to do what I normally do with cubine, which is to place a dot in the centre of each of these spaces here. Some of them will obviously be partially hidden. That one would be hidden there, that's hidden, and that one probably would be too. And then I'm going to do a little one in the middle of these little triangles, like so. I'm going to just draw a line down from that centre dot to the bottom of these squares, like so. And that's mirroring these grid lines here. And I'm just taking my time with this. Lovely. And then I'm going to turn my tile and join the centre dot into the new bottom here. And it's going to curve sort of in line with this line that we've drawn from our grid. So I'm sort of trying to keep these squares the same, on the same sort of orientation as the rest of the grid. And when you have ones that disappear behind what you've drawn so far, you can kind of just guess where you think that they would go. And once we've done that, this corner here of our square, our smaller inner square, is going to join the corner of our larger grid square with a straight line. These are obviously just going to go up to the top. They will be slightly wonky shaped on this axis, sort of this orientation of the tangle. And then what remains of this particular tangle is to ink in our squares. So I'm just going to spend a little bit of time doing that. Feel free if you would like to fast forward. I think I might actually fast forward. And I will see you when these are all filled in. Okay, so I filled in all of my little black spaces there. And I think I want to place some more cubine in here. So there's two options I feel like I have really. Either I can come from this side and get it bigger again, or so sort of start small in the same way I did in this corner and grow it out this way. Or I could continue this, so have it even larger and growing out through the tile underneath that Foundabout. And I think I might actually try that option because I think it could look quite striking rather than being too small and detailed here. So I'm going to draw this line down here, sort of hollyball where this grid line would go, and then continue it here. Bear in mind, I haven't planned this, so we don't know how it's going to look, but we'll see. I'm sure it will look good. There is that line there. And this line will be kind of behind here, and I'm going to just ink in these grid lines, or the border lines here. So these are going to be quite large. And actually, it's interesting because you might imagine that this particular one here would almost join the corner. So my curve that I drew here is going to be continued round to kind of link up with the corner here. So this then would be this corner square. So there's going to be a fair bit more inking in to do now, but I will quickly meter out my grid. Well, not quickly, I will do it now. So you can see. It's going to be quite a lot of ink, I think, in this corner. So the centre of my square here would be roughly here, and that line would come down here, and I feel like the corner line would vanish there. This line would be roughly here, and it would come down here. So this will all be inked in, and this will be inked in. And this space, the corner of, is already inked in here. So then it just remains these two sort of large squares here, and I feel like this would be maybe here, the dot would be, so this would just be a diagonal line, and this one, I probably can't see where the dot would be, but it would be somewhere, and that line would go there. So this is going to be inked in here. So there's not masses actually of inking in to do. It's going to be interesting to see how this looks when it's all completed. Just taking my time, inking in these spaces here. I think maybe I would see this diagonal line come up here. It doesn't all have to be absolutely like accurate and perfect geometrically, because it's just a hand-drawn pattern. There's no pressure, and that's one of the things with the Zentangle method that is so nice, is that you don't, you think, oh, my lines aren't straight, but it doesn't matter. Like, you're just doing this to enjoy creating, enjoy being creative, and there's no pressure to make it absolutely perfect, because no one's going to come and measure your angles or check to see if your lines are straight. When it comes to just creating art for the fun of it and the joy of it, doesn't matter whether the lines are straight or the angles are correct, or especially when you're carrying on a pattern and behind an existing tangle that you've drawn. Sometimes it's just enough to kind of give an idea of where the lines would go. And you can make these decisions as you go along. Like, I've obviously just decided on the fly there that I wanted to have my Cubine continuing on in this kind of perspective. But if you decided that you wanted to do it the other way and have it coming from this corner in the same way, then there's that's not the wrong way to do it. It's just a way to do it. And if you wanted to then try to do this tangle or this particular tile or a similar tile again, you could have a go at doing something different and see how that would look. It's all about experimenting and just enjoying the process of seeing how things work. So I think that's all my inked in spaces. I might just add a little idea of one there. But there we go. I think that's all my line work, and I'm now going to move on to doing some shading. So I've put my pen down and I've picked up my pencil. And the first thing I'm going to do is I like to start in the middle of my tile. So I think what I'm going to do is begin by shading my Foundabout. So adding a little bit of pencil where things disappear behind each other. And then also on the Betweed areas of my Foundabout. And I don't want to go crazy with the amount of graphite I'm adding here, because I want the Foundabout really to stand out from the Cubine in the background. So I'm just putting a small amount here and there in these overlapping sections, and a small amount down the middle of this Betweed. Now you can see that I've not been specific in going in. You can, if you want to, be more specific about where the graphite lands, but I think the thing with Betweed is that you don't necessarily, because it can be quite small, and because I've got very small ones up here, I don't want to be worrying about this sort of general specifics of things, or making sure they land in the right place. So I'm going to just sort of put a bit of a line down where these sort of plaited lines of the Betweed overlap, and it should give me this sort of similar feel. And then I might just add a little bit in the corners where the lines converge, but I don't want to overdo it because I don't want to have masses and masses of graphite in this area. Like so. So picking up my tortillon, I'm going to just gently blend the graphite. So just blending there. I think it is nice to kind of follow these Betweed lines, but to be honest, once you blend them in, the shading there kind of looks very similar to this shading, I think, so you don't have to worry too much about being too specific with it. Oh, I've missed a little section there. And the nice thing here is because I've added an aura around this Foundabout, even if we are, there is a fair amount of graphite in this tangle here, but because we've got the aura, it's going to separate things out from the background. So there is a fair bit of graphite there, but I'm going to now add some around the outside of this aura, and that will just help this Foundabout to pop out a little bit more. I'm not worrying about where the graphite would be or the shadows would be on my Cubine at this point. I'm just going to go around the edge of my Foundabout. Now, I'm not going to take the shadow over this black area here because it will make that look less black. It will make the kind of the silvery shininess of the graphite will deter a little bit from the deepness of the black, but it will still give you the idea. I'm obviously going outside of the borderline here just to shade around the outside. And as you can see, I'm pointing the point of my pencil towards the line that I'm shading up against, because I want to retain as much as possible. I want to keep the graphite away from the aura, and it will make it slightly more precise. So there's shaded around the aura there, and I'm just going to then blend that gently, not too much. I've been fairly heavy-handed with the graphite, but it will just give that Foundabout a little bit of a boost and make it lift away from the background. A couple of areas I've forgotten to blend there, so I'm just doing those as I go. Just softening that graphite, and you can see how much that's now lifted itself away from the background. I think there's something quite fun about making it overlap that border as well, because obviously the border wasn't really a key part when we placed the Foundabout down. It was just a pencil line, but yeah, that kind of lifts it away from that background now. And then for the shading of the Cubine, you have to basically just select an area where you would like the shadow to be. So there's obviously within each little square section of our grid, there's an additional 2 spaces. One of those spaces is black, and then we're going to add a shade to one of these other 2 spaces. And I think what I'm going to do is add it to this one here on all of them. So depending on which way you hold up your tile, obviously, it's going to be sort of the top of this cubine. And I'm just adding kind of a loose layer of graphite into there. I'm not being too precious about filling it all the way with graphite, because that's kind of the job that my tortillon will do. My tortillon will blend the graphite and just give it a bit more of an even feel. So I'm not pressing hard, I'm just sort of gently adding that graphite to those sections. And you can see here how that's going to end up blending into the Foundabout, but it's going to keep that separation. I think the important thing whenever you're shading is to make sure you do retain some highlights, and actually that's what's quite nice about Cubine, is because you do have a whole kind of space that remains unshaded. It can look quite effective. Just gently adding that graphite to all of those spaces where it would be the same. And then I'm going to show, you can see here like the sort of roughness of the graphite I've added, but then just blending it with the tortillon just removes that entirely and softens everything to make it look much smoother. And already that's kind of completely blended in. There we go. Just gently blending in those areas of graphite. That would be one there, wouldn't it? So, getting it right to the edges. And then filling these smaller spaces. Like so. And there is my tile. So we have 3 tangles here. We have Cubine, we have Foundabout, and we have a bit of Betweed just in the centre of that Foundabout. Quite a lot of lines, but I think it looks really effective. The final thing that I might just do is just go in with a little bit of extra graphite around this Foundabout to make it pop even more. And actually one of my favourite tricks that you can do, I'll show you this first. Let me add this graphite in. It takes a little bit of practice to get kind of bold with your shading, and I'm actually going to be doing a course on that on my website coming soon, is to kind of help you practice and be bold with shading in Zentangle. But yeah, just adding, not being afraid to go back in and add more is kind of key. So there we go. Now it doesn't really need so much blending because it has already been blended, but just to take any edges of that line away is good. And then the final thing I'm going to do, once I've blended this second round of graphite, is to pick up my pen again and just go back in and just embolden slightly anywhere where I want the graphite and the shadows to be the darkest. So I've got my pen here and I'm just going to go around the edges where I want these shadows to be dark and just emphasize these lines, and it just makes everything pop slightly more, I find. So just reiterating these lines here around the edge with this aura. It's such a simple final step, but I really think it does just make it lift away. It's just adding to the sort of the deepest shadows to the shade that we've already added. And I'm not going back over the inked sections because it's not necessary unless there's little spots you need to fill in. And I'm just also being mindful that there's quite a lot of graphite on the tile now, so I don't want to smudge it, so I'm just being careful where I place my hand. You can obviously add a piece of paper or something to lean on if you're worried about smudging things. Just turning the tile as we go, restating that line, emphasising the deepest of the black. And that's it. I think that really does make it pop out even more. So there is my tile, and I hope you've enjoyed doing it too. The final thing to do is just to add our chops. So I'm going to add my Ivy's Corner chop here. Your chop is just your initials or your marks, so you know that it's your tile. I'm going to turn my tile and sign it. Take ownership of your art. I'm going to date it, and I'm going to just make any notes that you can date it and make any notes about what you want to do on there as well, what you've been doing, the lesson that you've been following. But there is our tile. And the final step of the Zentangle method is just another moment for gratitude and appreciation, and just marvelling at what we've created in such a short amount of time. I hope you really enjoyed this. Let me just bring these other tangles in here so you can kind of be reminded what we've put together to create this lovely tile. Yeah, but that's our lovely tile today. Now, if you don't already, please do like and subscribe this video. You can also follow me on Instagram, Facebook and TikTok, and I'm on Pinterest as well. So all the different social media channels, drop me a follow on all of those. I do have a beginner's course available, also a couple of free courses, so one that's an introduction and one that's sort of an intermediate lesson for people who've done Zentangle before, and all sorts of fun and exciting things coming up. So as I said, there's a shading course on its way, there's a next steps in Zentangle class which will be coming soon. So just follow me on all my channels. You can subscribe to my newsletter at the link in the comments as well, and yeah, I'd love it if you would join my community. Thank you so much for watching, and take care.